northern France, a gray sky, thick with smoke from the last working chimneys. It's early morning, the kind of cold that bites through your jacket before the sun even tries to rise. Jean stands outside the factory gates, hands buried deep in his coat pockets. Behind him, the building hums with a strange quiet. No machines, no clatter, just footsteps slow, heavy, uncertain. Inside, taped to the glass door, a single white paper flutters in the wind. Factory permanently closed. He reads it once, twice. The words don't move. They just stay there. For 27 years, this was his rhythm. The 5 a.m. alarm, the smell of oil and steel, the laughter during lunch breaks, the same radio songs playing between the noise of machines. Now, there's nothing. The others drift away in silence, their boots scraping against the gravel. Some curse under their breath. Others just stare at the ground. Jean doesn't say a word. He looks at his hands, rough, scarred, built for bolts and metal. Hands that suddenly have nowhere to go. That night, he sits in his small kitchen. The clock ticks too loudly. A cup of coffee grows cold beside him. He stares at the empty wall, the same way he stared at that piece of paper. Outside, rain starts to fall soft, steady, like the world is whispering something he's not ready to hear. He wonders, not for the first time in his life, what a man becomes when the work that defined him disappears. The rain keeps falling. The lights flicker once. And somewhere, in the stillness, a quiet thought begins to breathe. Jean, 50 years old, had worked at a car parts factory in northern France for almost 3 decades. He had joined when he was just 22, a young man looking for something steady, something simple. Over the years, the job had become more than work. It was routine, identity, and rhythm all in one. He woke up every morning at 5, brewed the same strong coffee, rode his bicycle to the factory, and started his shift at 6. The noise, the smell of oil, the chatter during breaks, it all became the background music of his life. When management announced a general meeting, no one expected bad news. Some thought it was about new safety regulations, others about production targets. Jean didn't think much of it either. He showed up holding his thermos and a small sandwich, ready for another ordinary day. The manager stood in front of them with a paper in hand. His voice was calm, but heavy. He spoke about market instability, rising production costs, and decreased demand. Then came the final sentence, short, clear, impossible to process. The factory would close permanently in 2 weeks. Silence filled the hall. Some men stared straight ahead. Others cursed under their breath. A few simply walked out. Jean didn't move. He just stood there, looking at the floor, as if trying to find an answer written in the dust. That afternoon, when he left the building, the machines were already quiet. The parking lot, usually filled with laughter and cigarette smoke, felt hollow. Jean nodded to a few coworkers, but said nothing. He unlocked his bike and rode home without looking back. At home, he hung up his coat, poured out the leftover coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table. The room was still. On the table lay unpaid bills, a few old papers, and his small notebook, the one where he used to write his weekly shifts. None of it meant anything anymore. The next morning, John woke at the same hour out of habit. He made coffee, got dressed, and put on his shoes, then stopped at the door. There was nowhere to go. He stood there for a long time, hearing the distant sound of a bus passing by before sitting back down. 2 weeks later, the factory officially shut down. Workers were called in to sign forms and collect their final pay. The manager shook everyone's hand, thanked them for their years of service. Jean nodded, took his envelope, and walked away. On the way home, he stopped by the supermarket to buy bread and milk. People around him carried on with their day shopping, chatting, living, but Jean felt like he had stepped outside of time. Everything moved, except him. That night, he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The city was quiet. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, only that the life he had known for 30 years had ended without warning. The first few days after the closure felt strange, like waking up from a long dream and realizing the world had moved on without him. Jean still woke early. His body refused to forget the rhythm of decades. He'd sit in the kitchen, staring at the steam from his coffee, listening to the clock tick. Each sound reminded him there was nothing waiting for him outside anymore. At first, he tried to stay busy. He cleaned the apartment, fixed a leaky tap, organized old tools in the garage. But after a while, There was nothing left to fix. The quiet became heavier, stretching through the day like fog. Sometimes he walked through the town. The bakery still smelled the same. The buses still passed by at the same time. But when he reached the street where the factory stood, everything looked wrong. The gates were locked. A for sale sign hung where the company name used to be. The parking lot was empty except for a few puddles reflecting the gray sky. He saw some of his old coworkers now and then. They'd nod politely, maybe exchange a few words about job centers or unemployment forms. But the conversations always ended quickly. Everyone carried the same weight, the same quiet shame of no longer belonging anywhere. Back home, Gene would turn on the television just to hear a voice. News anchors talked about rising unemployment, layoffs, and economic shifts. It was strange hearing his life turned into statistics. After a few minutes, he'd turn it off again. Meals became smaller, days became longer. Sometimes he'd catch himself reaching for his work jacket before remembering there was no reason to wear it. The jacket stayed hanging by the door like a ghost of the life he used to have. At night, sleep rarely came easily. He'd lie awake listening to the distant hum of cars on the highway. He thought about the years he'd given to the factory, the overtime hours, the weekends missed, the small injuries that never fully healed. For what? He didn't feel angry, just hollow. His friends stopped calling as often. Some had moved away for new jobs. Others were struggling in silence. The town was shrinking, slowly, like a place forgotten by the world. One morning, J.R. opened his wallet and stared at the bills inside. The severance pay was running out faster than he expected. He made a list of small expenses to cut coffee brands, bus tickets, electricity usage, but no numbers could fix the truth he didn't want to say out loud. He had no plan. That evening, he walked to the edge of town where the old canal ran quiet. He watched the water move slowly under the bridge. For years, he'd crossed that same bridge on his way to work without noticing it. Now he stood there for nearly an hour just staring. When he got home, he sat at the kitchen table, opened his notebook, and wrote 3 words on the first blank page: "Find something else." He looked at the words for a long time, then closed the notebook and left it there. He didn't know what something else meant, yet only that he couldn't keep living in the silence much longer. Weeks passed, and the silence began to take shape not just around Jan, but inside him. He stopped shaving regularly. The plants by the window wilted. Dishes stacked up in the sink until he finally forced himself to wash them, not out of care, but guilt. Every morning, he checked the job listings online. Experience required, bachelor's degree preferred, under 40. The words blurred together. He'd fill out applications anyway, but most went unanswered. When replies did come, they were polite rejections, the kind that started with "thank you for your interest" and ended with nothing. At first, he told himself it was fine, that it would just take time. But as the weeks dragged on, hope became thinner, like paper worn through at the edges. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the unemployment office asking him to attend a skills assessment. The tone was formal, detached. John went, sitting in a room filled with strangers who all shared the same quiet unease. The instructor spoke about reintegration programs and career reorientation. John filled out the forms, but none of the boxes felt like him. Mechanic, operator, assembler, all words from a world that no longer existed. Afterward, he stopped at a cafe, ordered a small coffee, and sat by the window. Outside, people hurried by in suits and scarves, faces glowing with purpose. He watched them like someone watching a movie with no sound. When he looked down, his hands were trembling slightly. He set the cup down carefully, afraid it might spill. At home, the heating bill lay unopened on the table. The groceries were fewer each week. He started counting coins before going to the store. One day, while repairing a loose shelf, the wrench slipped from his grip and clattered to the floor. The sound echoed through the apartment, sharp, metallic, final. Jane froze. Then something inside him gave way. He sank to the floor, resting his back against the wall, and covered his face with his hands. He wasn't angry anymore, just tired of trying to make sense of what he had become. He thought about the factory, about the years spent building things that outlived him, engines, frames, machines. He had never imagined that the hardest thing to rebuild would be himself. As evening settled, the light faded from the window. The wrench still lay on the floor, reflecting a faint glimmer of sunset. Jan didn't move to pick it up. For the first time in his life, He had nothing to fix. Later that night, he opened the small notebook again. The words, "Find something else," stared back at him. He drew a line under them, then added 2 more words. But what? He closed the book slowly. The question lingered in the air, unanswered. The next morning came like all the others, quiet, gray, slow. Jean didn't expect anything different, but around noon, there was a knock on his door. It was his neighbor Claire, holding a small red bicycle. Her son's bike chain had snapped, and she asked if Jean could take a look at it. Jean hesitated. He hadn't touched a tool since that day in the garage. Still, he nodded and wheeled the bike inside. The tools were where he had left them, a little dusty, but waiting. He flipped the bike over, tightened a few bolts, cleaned the chain, and reattached it. The movements came naturally, as if his hands had been waiting for a purpose. When the bike was fixed, Claire smiled. "You've still got the touch," she said. Her son, maybe 8 or 9 years old, rode it down the street laughing. It was the first sound of joy Jean had heard in months. That night, he slept better. It wasn't much, just one small repair, but something had shifted. A few days later, another neighbor stopped by, asking if he could fix an old mountain bike that had been in storage. Then another came with a flat tire. Soon people were knocking on his door every week. Jean didn't advertise, didn't charge much, just enough for parts and a bit of coffee money. But the work filled his days again. The garage began to change. Tools returned to their places. The smell of oil and rubber replaced the scent of dust. There was noise again, small, familiar, comforting. One afternoon, while patching a tire, Jean realized he was humming the same tune the factory radio used to play during shifts. He stopped for a moment, smiled, then kept working. Word spread through the neighborhood. Parents, students, delivery riders, everyone seemed to have a bike in need of care. Jean started keeping a small notebook of repairs, just like he once logged machine hours. Except this time, it wasn't for a boss or a paycheck. It was for himself. As the weeks passed, his confidence grew. He began collecting spare parts from scrap yards, rebuilding frames from old models. He didn't see it as a business, just something honest to do with his time. But there was a quiet satisfaction in seeing each bike ride away working again. Sometimes people stayed to chat about the weather, their jobs, their lives. It wasn't the same as the factory camaraderie, but it felt human, real. One evening, Claire stopped by again to pay for another repair. She looked around at the garage full of bikes and said, "You know, you could make this into something." Jean laughed. "It's nothing serious." But after she left, he stood in the doorway for a long time, looking at the small space, the shelves, the tools, the faint smell of grease. For the first time in a year, he didn't feel like he was waiting for his life to restart. It already had. He didn't know it yet, but that single broken bike was the first piece of something much bigger, the beginning of his rebuild. By spring, Jean's garage no longer looked like a storage space. It looked like a workshop. Rows of bikes leaned neatly against the wall, sorted by type and color. A workbench stood by the window, scattered with wrenches, grease, and half-finished projects. The once empty days now had structure again. Mornings for repairs, afternoons for customers, evenings for paperwork, and quiet reflection. At first, he didn't plan for it to grow, but people kept coming. A friend from town printed a small sign that read, "Jean's Workshop Repairs and Restorations." They hung it by the front gate. The sign was simple, white paint on wood, but it made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: pride. Orders started coming in faster than he could manage alone. Some were simple tune-ups, others full rebuilds of bikes people had nearly thrown away. He began waking up before dawn again, just like in the old factory days. But this time, the work felt different. It wasn't about meeting quotas. It was about creating something useful with his own hands and seeing the immediate result. One day, he ran into Pascal, a former co-worker from the factory, at the grocery store. Pascal looked tired, still searching for steady work. Jean told him about the workshop. A week later, Pascal came by to help. Then another old colleague, Mark, joined too. Soon the three of them worked side by side, the same rhythm as before, tools clinking, laughter breaking the silence. Only now they set their own pace. They expanded into the small shed next door. Jen started keeping receipts, ordering parts in bulk, and learning about basic business management through free community courses. The process was new, awkward at first, but exciting. The workshop that began as a distraction slowly turned into a real business. The local paper did a short piece on them former factory workers rebuild more than bikes. It brought new faces, curious customers, and even a few offers from local schools to teach repair workshops. Jean felt embarrassed reading his own name in print, but secretly he kept the article folded in his wallet. Every Friday, he and his team would share lunch outside, sandwiches, coffee, a little music from an old radio. It reminded him of the factory breaks they used to have, except this time there was no foreman, no rush, no fear, just work, laughter, and purpose. By summer, they had repaired over 100 bikes, some for pay, some for free, especially for kids or people who couldn't afford it. John noticed how the shop had become more than a workplace. It was a place where stories were exchanged, where people found help, where men who had once lost everything found a reason to get up in the morning again. One evening, after closing, Jean stayed behind. The garage was quiet except for the ticking of a cooling metal rim. He looked around at the shelves, the tools, the traces of work everywhere. There was sweat, dirt, and chaos, but also life. He thought back to the day he had sat on the kitchen floor, wrench in hand, feeling empty. It felt like a lifetime ago. Now those same hands built something again, not just bikes, but meaning. As he turned off the lights and stepped outside, he noticed the smell of summer air, mixed with oil and metal. It was the scent of work, but this time, it belonged to him. Autumn came quietly. The leaves along the street turned gold and rust, and the days grew shorter. Jean's workshop, once a dim garage, now glowed warmly in the early evening light spilling from the open door, the sound of laughter drifting out to the street. Inside, a few bikes waited to be picked up. Pascal swept the floor while Mark finished tightening a brake line. Jean sat at the workbench, entering numbers into a small ledger. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They could pay the rent, keep the lights on, and still have a little left at the end of the month. That night, after the others left, Jean stayed behind. He made himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the doorframe, watching the quiet street outside. A few kids rode past on bikes he recognized ones he had repaired. They waved, laughing. He raised a hand back, smiling. He thought about everything that had happened in the factory, the silence, the despair, and the small red bicycle that had started it all. None of it felt accidental anymore. Losing his job had once felt like the end of everything, but now, standing there, he realized it had forced him to rediscover who he really was, not just a worker, but a builder, a teacher, a man who could start again. He didn't think of success the way he used to. It wasn't about money or stability. It was about movement, the rhythm of doing something meaningful, no matter how small. He no longer woke with dread, but with quiet purpose. There was always something to fix, something to improve. Later, he sat down and opened his old notebook. The first page still said, "Find something else." Underneath, he wrote, "I did." He closed the book, exhaled softly, and looked around the workshop, the worn tools, the faint scent of oil, the steady calm of a place rebuilt from nothing. For years, he had thought the factory was his home, but now he knew home was never the building. It was the work, the people, and the will to begin again. The next morning, he arrived early, as he always did. The air was crisp, and a thin layer of frost covered the bikes outside. He unlocked the door, turned on the lights, and smiled at the familiar hum of the space coming to life. For the first time in a very long time, John didn't feel like he was starting over. He simply felt alive.